What if the quiet kid your teacher mocked turned out to be smarter than every student in the school? I can't, Miss Aldridge. Those simple words silenced the room like a sudden chill. The classroom, once buzzing with the morning shuffle of papers and whispering students, froze. All eyes turned to Miles Bennett, the quiet 13-year-old standing beside his desk. Ms. Cynthia Aldridge, the strictest math teacher at Westbridge Middle School, narrowed her gaze. Her posture sharpened and her fingers curled into the edge of her desk. "You can't?" she repeated coldly. "Or you won't." Miles looked down, clutching the straps of his backpack with trembling hands. His voice, when it came, was soft but steady. "My back hurts. I can't sit today." Laughter erupted from the back of the room. Dylan Harper, always ready to play the class clown, whispered something to the boy next to him. A few students smirked, others looked confused. But most just watched, unsure whether to pity Miles or distance themselves. Ms. Aldridge walked slowly to the front of the class, her heels clicking against the tile. She didn't smile. She rarely did. "Oh, how convenient," she said, her tone laced with mockery. "Your back hurts today, just like your dog ate your homework last week, and your alarm failed the week before that." Miles didn't respond. He didn't dare. The last time he'd tried to explain himself, he ended up staying after class, hands shaking, eyes red, forced to erase every board in the room while Miss Aldridge lectured him on discipline. "You will sit," she said, her voice suddenly low and dangerous. "Like everyone else. Right now." Miles flinched. But he didn't move. The pain in his lower back had been with him for days now, sharp, hot, and unforgiving. It had started after Miss Aldridge struck him across the back with a wooden ruler for what she called poor posture. No one had seen it. No one had asked. He hadn't told anyone. Not even his parents. What could he say? That the teacher they trusted, the one with glowing credentials and decades of experience, was hurting him. "I said sit," she barked, slamming her palm against the desk. Still, he stood. A heavy silence followed. And then, with venomous calm, Ms. Aldridge turned to the board and began erasing the day's lesson. Instead of the 8th grade algebra problem she had planned, she scribbled a long, complex calculus equation. Symbols and letters twisted across the whiteboard far beyond anything the class had ever seen. "If you're too special to follow instructions," she said, not bothering to hide the sneer in her voice, "why don't you show us just how special you are?" She stepped back and folded her arms. "This is a problem for my 11th grade advanced placement class." The room exploded in whispers and stifled giggles. Even Dylan looked surprised. Ms. Aldridge was out for blood. "You have 5 minutes," she added, checking her watch. "If you fail, it's detention for a week." Miles stared at the board. At first, it felt like a blur of nonsense. His palms went cold. His heart thundered in his chest. But then something shifted. Buried deep beneath the fear and humiliation, a flicker of recognition ignited. He knew this. He had seen similar equations before late at night, hunched over borrowed textbooks in the corner of the local library. While other kids played video games or watched YouTube, he had been teaching himself. Algebra, trigonometry, pre-calc, and lately calculus. It had started almost by accident. One day, Ms. Rachel Quinn, the librarian, had handed him a forgotten college-level math book left behind on a table. "Looks like something you'd enjoy," she had said, with a kind smile. She wasn't wrong. From that moment on, Miles had been hooked. Every evening, while his younger sister watched cartoons, Miles worked silently at their shared dining table, solving problems, writing proofs, watching free lectures online. No one at school knew, not Miss Aldridge. Not his classmates. And certainly not Principal Leonard Drake. To them, he was just another forgettable boy from a working-class family. A C-minus student with wrinkled clothes and tired eyes, but now, as he stared at the board, the numbers made sense. They welcomed him, like old friends. He picked up the marker with shaking fingers. A few students chuckled. "Oh, he's actually trying," Dylan said, loud enough to draw more laughter. But Miles ignored them. Slowly, carefully, he began to write. Step by step. Each line came with growing confidence. The room quieted. Even the smirking stopped. The clock ticked, and within minutes, the equation was solved beautifully, completely, undeniably correct. Mrs. Aldridge walked up to the board, her face unreadable. Her eyes scanned the solution. Then again. Then a third time. "This is—" she began, her voice cracking slightly. She cleared her throat. "This must be copied. You couldn't have solved this on your own." Miles didn't flinch. "I did," he said simply. She shook her head, almost dazed. And then, in a sudden burst of fury, she grabbed the marker and scribbled over his solution. "Enough!" she snapped. "Principal's office. Now." But I didn't. I said now. As Miles gathered his things in silence, a voice spoke up from the back of the room. It was Nia Collins, the quiet girl who rarely said a word. What if he really solved it? The question hung in the air. Miss Aldridge glared at her. But no one else laughed. No one said a word. Because deep down, they all knew. Something had just changed. Forever. The hallway outside Principal Leonard Drake's office was quiet. Too quiet for a school morning. Miles Bennett sat alone on a wooden bench, his backpack clutched tightly to his chest. His shoulders were hunched, not from bad posture, but from pain. Real pain. Not just the kind in his back, but the kind that comes from being humiliated again and not knowing if anyone will ever believe you. Inside, behind the frosted glass door, voices rose and fell. He could hear Principal Leonard Drake pacing, her words sharp and fast. Insubordination. Disruptive. And this so-called math solution? Completely implausible. He must have cheated. Principal Drake's voice was lower, harder to make out. Miles closed his eyes and pressed his forehead against the cool plaster wall. This wasn't the first time he'd been sent here. But it was the first time he wasn't in trouble for something he actually did wrong. Last week, it was for showing up to class without a completed homework packet. He'd worked on it, but he'd missed one question. Miss Aldridge had called it a deliberate act of laziness. The week before, it was for not raising his hand before answering. And before that, for slouching disrespectfully. He'd gotten used to the punishments. He hadn't gotten used to the silence that followed. No one asked him why. No one asked what was really going on. Until today. The office door creaked open, and Principal Drake stepped out. He was a tall man, with graying temples, always looking one coffee short of alertness. "Miles," he said, voice neutral, "come in." Miles stood slowly, doing his best not to wince as pain shot up his lower back. He followed the principal into the room, where Miss Aldridge sat primly in a visitor's chair, arms crossed tight. "Ms. Aldridge has explained the situation," Principal Drake said, gesturing to the other seat. Miles hesitated before sitting, then lowered himself slowly, stiffly. "I didn't cheat," he said, voice low but steady. "I solved it. I've been studying on my own." Ms. Aldridge let out a sharp breath. "Oh, please," she snapped. "He's a C- student. That problem was from an 11th grade calculus exam. He must have memorized it." Miles didn't flinch. "I didn't. I've been studying online and at the library." Principal Drake leaned back in his chair. "Miles," he said slowly, "can you explain why you refused to sit down in class today?" The question hung there for a moment. Miles' eyes dropped to the floor. "My back hurts," he said. The words were barely above a whisper. Drake frowned. "From what?" I fell." Ms. Aldridge raised her eyebrows dramatically. He could feel her eyes on him, daring him to say more. Principal Drake narrowed his eyes. "Miles, are you sure that's what happened?" He nodded, even though every part of him wanted to scream the truth. The ruler. The slap. The way Ms. Aldridge had muttered, "Maybe next time you'll sit up straight," like it was part of the lesson. But no one ever believed a kid like him over a teacher like her. So he said nothing. Drake sighed. "This is a difficult situation," he said. "Ms. Aldridge has been teaching math here for over 20 years. "She's wrong," Miles said quietly. "I solved the problem." The room went still. "You can give me another one. Right now." "I'll solve it again." Drake looked surprised. Ms. Aldridge laughed, a high, brittle sound. "This is nonsense," she said. "He's performing for attention." Before Drake could respond, a knock came at the office door. The door opened, and in stepped Miss Lena Carter, the science teacher. Young, energetic, and well-liked by students, she was the kind of teacher who made the air feel lighter just by entering a room. "Sorry to interrupt," she said, glancing around. "But I heard Miles was here." Principal Drake raised an eyebrow. "Yes, we're in the middle of a disciplinary review." Ms. Carter's eyes landed on the paper in Miles's hand. The detention slip. She frowned. "What happened?" she asked. "Just a classroom issue," Ms. Aldridge answered quickly. "Not your department." "Actually," Ms. Carter said firmly, "it involves one of my students. That makes it very much my department." There was a beat of silence. Ms. Carter turned to Principal Drake. "Is this about a math problem?" Drake nodded. She turned to Miles. "Was it like the equations you used in your science fair project?" Miles blinked. "Yes, ma'am," he said softly. Drake sat up straighter. "Wait, science fair? Ms. Carter smiled, her voice calm but proud. Miles entered the regional science fair last spring. His project was on plant growth modeling using differential equations. He placed third overall and first in the mathematics category. Ms. Aldridge's mouth opened, but no words came out. "He's been studying on his own for months," Ms. Carter continued. "I've seen his notebooks. He even helps me grade the extra credit problems." Principal Drake turned to Miles, stunned. "Is this true?" Miles nodded. Drake looked from one teacher to the other. "Then why haven't I heard about this before?" "Because I asked her not to tell anyone," Miles said. "I didn't want people to think I was weird." Ms. Carter gave him a warm look. but I can't stay quiet while he's being punished for something he didn't do." The principal was quiet for a long moment. Then he sighed. "I think we need to re-evaluate the situation. Miles, how would you feel about taking a supervised test tomorrow morning? A range of problems, including calculus, just to verify what you know." Miles nodded. "Yes, sir." "Ms. Aldridge, will you prepare the test?" She sat stiffly. "Of course, but I expect it to be thorough." "Miss." Carter raised her hand. "Perhaps someone else should review the questions to ensure fairness." Drake looked at them both. "Agreed. Ms. Aldridge will prepare the test, but I'll approve it. Miles, the detention is suspended, pending the results." As the meeting ended, Miles stood up. Miss Carter walked with him down the hallway. "You okay?" she asked. He nodded, then looked up. "Thank you." "For believing me." Miss Carter smiled. "Sometimes. That's all a kid needs." Outside, the spring air felt different, like it belonged to him again. Tomorrow would be another test, but for the first time, he wouldn't face it alone. The next morning, Riverdale Middle School felt unusually tense. The spring sun was shining, the birds chirped softly outside, but inside the building, the air buzzed with anticipation. Students whispered in the hallways. Some pointed as Miles Bennett walked by. Others just watched in silence, their curiosity painted plainly on their faces. He wasn't used to the attention. Normally, Miles would have kept his head down and moved quickly from one class to another, hoping to avoid being noticed. But today, there was no use hiding. Everyone already knew. Today was his test. Principal Leonard Drake had arranged for the exam to take place in the conference room, not Miss Cynthia Aldridge's classroom. That small gesture alone had meant the world to Miles. He didn't have to face the cold glares or whispered doubts while proving he belonged. When Miles arrived outside the conference room at 8:45 a.m., Ms. Lena Carter was already waiting. "You ready?" she asked with a kind smile. Miles shrugged, adjusting the straps of his backpack. "Nervous," he admitted. "But yeah, ready." Ms. Carter squeezed his shoulder gently. "Just do your best. You've already shown what you can do. This is just the part where everyone else catches up." Inside the room, Principal Drake stood beside a long table, a sealed envelope placed squarely in the center. Ms. Aldridge sat across from him, her expression unreadable stiff, like someone determined to remain composed no matter what. "Good morning, Miles," Principal Drake said formally. "Have a seat." "Let's go over the rules." Miles nodded, lowering himself slowly into the chair. A thick cushion had been placed there, another small act of grace from the principal. He appreciated it more than he could say. "You'll have 2 hours to complete as many problems as you can," Principal Drake explained. "The questions range from 8th grade algebra up through advanced placement calculus." Ms. Aldridge prepared the test, and I've reviewed it to ensure it's appropriate. Miles glanced at the envelope. It looked like it held a mountain inside. "Any questions before we begin?" He shook his head. "No, sir." "All right, then." Principal Drake broke the seal and laid the test papers and pencils in front of him. "You may begin." The door clicked shut behind him as the two teachers stepped out. Miles took a breath. Another? Then he flipped the first page. It started with a simple algebraic equation, one so basic it almost felt insulting. He finished it in less than 20 seconds, then moved to the next. and the next. Within 5 minutes, he had completed the entire first page. The second page introduced more advanced algebra and trigonometry. Still no problem. He worked steadily, his pencil gliding smoothly across the paper. By the time he reached the third page, pre-calculus, he felt a calm focus settle over him. This was where he came alive. Outside in the hallway, Miss Aldridge paced back and forth, her heels clicking against the tiles. Ms. Carter sat on a bench nearby, flipping through a science journal, though her attention clearly wasn't on the pages. "This is a waste of time," Ms. Aldridge muttered. "He's probably sitting there in silence, staring at the questions." "Why does it bother you so much that he might succeed?" Ms. Carter asked, not looking up. Aldridge froze mid-step. "Excuse me. You've been teaching for over 20 years. You've earned your respect. So why is it so hard to believe that a student like Miles might be exceptional?" The math teacher didn't answer. Not right away. Instead, she crossed her arms and resumed pacing. Back inside the conference room, Miles reached the final page. Calculus. His fingers tingled with recognition. These problems were familiar variations of the ones he had worked on with Dr. James Roberts during their library sessions. He remembered Dr. Roberts' words, "It's not about memorizing steps, it's about understanding the dance." And that's exactly what Miles did. He danced across the page with numbers and symbols, showing not only one way to solve each problem, but two, sometimes three. He explained his thinking in clean, careful writing, just like Dr. Roberts had taught him. He forgot about the room. He forgot about the clock. For those precious minutes, it was just him and the language he loved. When he finally put his pencil down, he realized he was done. He looked up. A clock on the wall showed only 45 minutes had passed. He had completed a 2-hour test in less than half the time. He raised his hand. Principal Drake stepped back in. "You okay?" he asked. Miles nodded. "I need more paper," he said. "I want to show some alternate solutions for the last 2 problems." Drake blinked. "You've finished already?" "Yes, sir." Drake went to get more paper, visibly stunned. Outside the room, he spoke in a low voice. "He's done. And he's asking for more paper." Ms. Aldridge stared at him. "That's not possible." "It's been barely 45 minutes. "Nevertheless," the principal said, "he's completed everything, and it looks solid." Ms. Carter allowed herself a small, knowing smile. Back inside, Miles continued working, now adding visual graphs to demonstrate different methods of integration and slope interpretation. When he finally pushed his pencil away for good, he felt something shift inside him. He had given them everything. And more importantly, he had nothing to prove to himself anymore. Outside the door, whispers had already begun to ripple through the school. By the time Miles walked out of that room, he wasn't just the quiet kid from math class anymore. He was something else, something they hadn't seen coming, and the next step would be even bigger. Because soon, the world wouldn't just hear about what he did. They'd start to understand who he was. That afternoon, the atmosphere in Principal Leonard Drake's office felt heavy, as though the walls themselves were holding their breath. Miles Bennett sat quietly across from the principal, his test results neatly stacked on the desk between them. His back still ached from days past, but there was a calmness in his eyes. He wasn't nervous anymore, not like before. To his left, Ms. Cynthia Aldridge sat upright, her jaw tight, her hands folded so stiffly they looked carved from stone. On the other side sat Ms. Lena Carter, whose warm expression gently encouraged Miles to stay grounded. She had become more than just a teacher. In recent days, she had become his quiet anchor. Principal Drake cleared his throat and folded his hands. "Let's begin." He looked directly at Miles. "First, I want to acknowledge your performance this morning. It was extraordinary." Miles didn't smile. He only nodded slightly. "The results," Principal Drake continued, tapping the top page, "were reviewed independently by both Ms. Aldridge and Miss Carter." He turned to the teachers. "Would either of you like to comment?" Ms. Carter spoke first. "Miles didn't just complete the exam, he demonstrated conceptual mastery well beyond grade level. His work was clear, methodical, and at times elegant. That kind of intuitive mathematical reasoning is rare, even among college students." She turned to Miles. "You should be proud of yourself." He looked down, murmuring a quiet, "Thank you." Then came the voice from the other side of the room. Ms. Aldridge's. "The basic algebra was correct," she said, each word stiff and reluctant. "The trigonometry was fine." A pause. "But I remain skeptical about the calculus section." Principal Drake raised an eyebrow. "Skeptical in what way?" "The solutions are advanced," Aldridge replied. "Too advanced. I suspect coaching, perhaps even outside assistance." She turned her eyes toward Miles. "No 13-year-old solves these problems without help." Before the principal could speak, a knock sounded at the office door. Drake frowned, glancing at the clock. "We're in a meeting," he called. But the door opened slowly, and in stepped a man in a charcoal-grey suit, his salt and pepper beard neatly trimmed, eyes calm behind thin-rimmed glasses. "Apologies for the interruption," he said, with quiet confidence. "I'm Dr. James Roberts, professor of mathematics at the State University." Miles sat up straighter, eyes widening. Dr. Roberts gave him a subtle nod of reassurance. "I understand you're reviewing the academic performance of young Mr. Bennett," he said. "If I may, I believe I can provide some insight." Principal Drake stood, gesturing toward an open seat. "Please, come in." As Dr. Roberts sat, Miss Aldridge shifted uncomfortably. "And how exactly are you involved?" she asked tightly. "I've been mentoring Miles privately for the last 6 months," Dr. Roberts replied. "Not tutoring, mentoring. There's a difference. This young man is, in my professional opinion, the most gifted natural mathematician I've encountered in over 3 decades of teaching." Ms. Aldridge's mouth opened slightly, then closed without sound. "Mentoring?" the principal asked, trying to catch up. "How did that begin?" Dr. Roberts smiled at Miles before answering. "We met through the community center tutoring program. While most kids were asking for help with algebra, I noticed Miles sitting quietly in a corner, working through a freshman-level calculus book on his own." He looked back to the group. "That caught my attention." "And you just offered to work with him?" Aldridge asked, disbelief coloring her tone. "I didn't offer," Dr. Roberts said plainly. "I insisted. A mind like his needs nurturing." He reached for the stack of test pages on the principal's desk. "May I?" Principal Drake handed them over. "Dr." Roberts read through each page with slow, practiced care. His eyes moved steadily, occasionally nodding with approval. "Problem 17, he finally said. "That's not just correct. That's inventive." The substitution he used, most undergraduates wouldn't think of it. He looked directly at Mizzy. Aldridge, either he's a genius or you've grossly underestimated your student. A silence settled over the room, one that felt like something breaking. And then Principal Drake leaned forward. "I think we have enough evidence," he said, his voice low but firm. "Miss Aldridge, the question now isn't whether Miles solved the problem. It's why he was made to feel like he couldn't." Miles stared at the floor, his fingers twisted in his lap. And then Dr. Roberts asked gently, "Miles, why did you refuse to sit down in class that day?" He hesitated. His voice barely rose above a whisper. "My back hurt." Miss Aldridge crossed her arms. "He said that because he wanted attention. The class was being disrupted." But Dr. Roberts tilted his head. "Miles," he said softly, "would you mind showing us?" A long pause. Then slowly, Miles stood, turned, and lifted the back of his shirt. Gasps filled the room. 3 long red welts cut across his skin, healed but unmistakable. Principal Drake's face darkened. "Dr." Roberts stood quietly, his jaw clenched. Miss Carter covered her mouth. And Miss Aldridge froze. "Where did you get those?" the principal asked, though he already knew the answer. "I fell," Miles said. It wasn't believable. Not this time. "That's enough," Principal Drake said, standing. "I'll be contacting your parents immediately, and the district superintendent." Mrs. Aldridge rose too. "This is outrageous. You're taking the word of a student." "No," Principal Drake said coldly. "I'm taking the evidence of my own eyes." Then he turned to Miles. "You're not going back to her classroom. Ever again." Miles nodded slowly, and for the first time in what felt like years, he believed someone was truly standing up for him. The next morning dawned cold and quiet. Miles Bennett stood at the mirror in his bedroom, carefully buttoning the collar of the only dress shirt he owned. His mother had ironed it late last night, even though she didn't say much. She just pressed her hand gently to his shoulder and said, "Do your best, baby, that's all we ask." His father, already dressed in his construction uniform, had come in from the kitchen, nodded once and said, "We're proud of you." No matter what. Those words followed Miles like a protective layer as he walked the halls of Westbrook Middle School that morning. Whispers swirled. Students peeked from around lockers. He had become the center of attention overnight, but not for the usual reasons. He wasn't the kid who got sent to the principal's office anymore. He was the boy who might be a genius. The test was scheduled for 9 a.m., and Principal Leonard Drake had arranged for it to take place in the small conference room near his office. Miles was grateful. He didn't want to be anywhere near Miss Aldridge's classroom again. As he reached the room, Miss Carter was already waiting for him, her warm eyes offering a sense of calm. "You ready?" she asked gently. Miles gave a small nod. "Nervous," he admitted. "But ready." She squeezed his shoulder. "Remember, this test doesn't define you. It just helps them see what I already know." Inside, Principal Drake was seated at the head of the table, a sealed manila envelope resting in front of him. Miss Aldridge sat on the other side of the room, arms crossed, her mouth drawn tight. She still didn't believe him. "Miles," the principal said, gesturing for him to take a seat, "let me explain how this will work." He slid the envelope forward. "These problems were created by Mrs. Aldridge and reviewed by me to ensure fairness. They range from basic algebra to advanced calculus. You'll have 2 hours to complete as many as you can. He paused. You'll be supervised directly. Ms. Aldridge and Mrs. Carter will wait outside. Ms. Aldridge huffed softly but said nothing. No calculators, the principal added. Just pencils and paper. Miles nodded. That's fine. Principal Drake broke the seal and handed him the test. You may begin. As the two teachers exited, the room settled into silence. Miles opened the first page. The first problem was basic an equation he could do in his sleep. He moved quickly through the initial questions, his pencil gliding across the paper. Each problem seemed to build, just as the principal had said. But none of them scared him. By page 3, he was deep into pre-calculus, then calculus. He paused only to check his logic, rereading each step like a language he spoke fluently. These weren't just numbers to Miles, they were patterns. Music, a world that made sense when everything else didn't. Principal Drake, seated quietly nearby, occasionally glanced up from his reading. He wasn't prepared for what he saw. Miles wasn't struggling, he wasn't guessing, he was working. Confidently, calmly, as if the chaos of the past week had vanished. And this moment was his home. After 40 minutes, Miles looked up. I need more paper. The principal blinked in surprise. You've finished? Miles nodded. I'm adding alternative solutions to some of the calculus problems. I want to show different ways they could be approached. Drake opened a drawer and handed him a fresh stack of paper. Proceed, he said quietly. Outside, Ms. Aldridge paced the hallway while Ms. Carter sat on a bench, flipping through a science journal. This is ridiculous, Aldridge muttered. He's probably sitting in there frozen. Ms. Carter didn't even look up. Or maybe he's showing us all what we missed. An hour later, Miles set his pencil down. His hands ached slightly, but not from fear. He had finished every question, some twice. Principal Drake gathered the papers and reviewed the first few pages in silence. Then he stood. I'll be making copies for Ms. Carter and Ms. Aldridge. We'll reconvene after lunch to discuss the results. Miles nodded and rose from his seat. As he stepped into the hallway, a few students glanced his way. Some smiled. Others stared, not with ridicule, but with curiosity. For the first time in his school life, Miles felt what it was like to be seen. At lunch, the conference room was filled again. Ms. Carter was there, Ms. Aldridge too, her face unreadable. Dr. Roberts had joined them, seated beside Miles like a quiet shield. Principal Drake stood. I've reviewed the test, so has Dr. Roberts, and our teachers. He paused. Miles, not only did you complete every problem correctly, but your methods, especially your alternative solutions, show a depth of understanding well beyond middle school. He turned to Ms. Carter. Your thoughts? She smiled. He's not just solving problems. He's thinking like a mathematician. His conceptual grasp is stunning. Then he looked to Ms. Aldridge. She hesitated. The answers are correct, she admitted. All of them. I was wrong. She didn't meet Miles's eyes. Then came the moment that silenced the room. Dr. Roberts stood. I've mentored university students for decades. What I see in Miles is rare. He has an intuitive mind, not just for numbers, but for structure, logic, and creative reasoning. That cannot be taught. It can only be recognized. He turned to Principal Drake. With your permission, I'd like to recommend Miles for early placement in college-level mathematics courses, and I would be honored to continue working with him. Miles stared at the table. He wasn't used to praise, but for once, he didn't flinch from it. The principal sat forward. We'll meet with your parents, Miles. We'll build a plan. You've earned not just our respect, but our support. And just like that, the tide shifted, not because of a protest, not because of a fight, but because a quiet boy stood tall when it mattered most. The bell rang for the end of the school day, but Miles Bennett didn't head to his locker. Instead, he walked quietly to the front office, where the secretary gave him a cautious smile. You can wait just over there, she said, gesturing to the bench outside Principal Drake's office. Miles nodded and took a seat, clutching his backpack tightly like a shield. He was no stranger to this bench. But today was different. Today, he wasn't here for being late or talking back. Today, he was here because someone didn't believe the truth. Inside the principal's office, the air was thick with tension. Veronica Aldridge sat in a visitor's chair, her expression a careful mix of indignation and calm. Across from her sat Principal Drake, who leaned forward slightly, hands folded. You're absolutely certain he cheated? He asked. I'm more than certain, Aldridge replied, without missing a beat. He's been a C- student in my class all year. There's no way he could have solved that problem legitimately. Drake raised an eyebrow, but the solution was correct. He memorized it, she insisted, or had it hidden somewhere. Perhaps on his phone. I'm sure if we searched him again. Principal Drake held up a hand. He was searched before entering the testing room. At your insistence. Aldridge pressed her lips together. Well then, maybe someone coached him. He must have had help. Drake sighed and sat back in his chair. Is it possible, Miss Aldridge, that you underestimated this student? The question lingered in the air. Outside, Miles sat still. His back ached, not from sitting, but from something else. From something no one knew yet. The ruler. Last week. Miss Aldridge had struck him hard across the lower back after he failed to answer quickly at the board. No witnesses. No evidence except the angry red welts that still hadn't fully faded. At the time, Miles had said nothing. Who would believe him? He was the troublemaker. The kid who showed up late, kept to himself, and didn't raise his hand in class. Now, even after proving himself, the same teacher who had hurt him was accusing him again, this time of cheating. He shifted on the bench, trying to ease the sting where the skin was still tender. Just then, the office door opened. Principal Drake stepped out. Miles, come in. Miles stood slowly, careful not to wince as pain flared up his spine. Inside, Miss Aldridge sat ramrod straight, her eyes narrow. Drake gestured to the seat across from her. Miles, we're trying to understand what happened during class yesterday. Your teacher believes you cheated. I didn't, Miles said firmly. Can you explain how you were able to solve that calculus problem? I've been studying on my own, he replied. For months. Drake nodded slowly. And why didn't you sit when Miss Aldridge asked you to? Miles hesitated. His eyes flicked to Miss Aldridge. She was watching him hard. A silent warning. He swallowed. My back hurt. Drake leaned in slightly. From what, Miles? I fell, he said quietly. Aldridge smirked. He's lying. It's all part of the same performance. The back pain, the cheating, the sudden genius-level math skills, it's all designed to make us look like fools. Principal Drake didn't speak right away. Then he stood. Wait here. He stepped out of the office and returned moments later with Ms. Carter, who blinked in surprise at the tension in the room. Miles, she said gently, what's going on? He looked down, ashamed. Drake's voice was quiet but serious. He says his back hurts, from a fall. But there may be more to the story. Ms. Carter crouched beside Miles. Would you be willing to show us? Miles froze. His hands clenched. He didn't want to. He wanted to go home, crawl into bed, and pretend none of this was happening. But something inside him shifted, a flicker of courage. Slowly, he stood, turned around, and lifted the back of his shirt just enough to show the red, raised marks across his lower back. Ms. Carter gasped. Drake's expression changed instantly. What happened? He asked, voice now sharper. I fell, Miles repeated, but the lie rang hollow. No one gets marks like that from falling, Mrs. Carter whispered. Aldridge stood up suddenly. This is absurd. You're taking the word of a student over a teacher with 27 years of experience? Those marks could have come from anything. A fight. His home life. You don't know. Drake raised a hand. Sit down, Miss. Aldridge. She did not. This meeting is over, she snapped. No, Drake replied firmly. It's not. He turned back to Miles. Tell me the truth, son. Was this done at school? Miles looked at the floor, then at Ms. Carter, who nodded gently. Telling the truth isn't disrespectful, she said softly. Miles's voice was almost a whisper. Last week, I couldn't solve the board problem fast enough. She hit me. Twice. The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. Aldridge's face turned pale. Drake rose from his seat. There will be a formal investigation, he said, effective immediately. Aldridge opened her mouth to object, but he didn't give her the chance. I'll also be contacting your parents, he told Miles, and the detention has been suspended until this is resolved. Aldridge grabbed her bag and stormed out, slamming the door behind her. Miles stood there, trembling slightly, until Mrs. Carter wrapped an arm gently around his shoulders. You did the right thing, she said. We believe you. Principal Drake nodded. Thank you for your honesty, Miles. You were braver than many adults would have been. As Miles walked out of the office, he felt a strange mixture of fear and relief. The truth had finally come out. And this time, someone had listened. The morning sunlight filtered through the windows of Westbridge Middle School, but inside the conference room, the atmosphere was far from warm. Miles Bennett sat alone at a rectangular table, facing a stack of crisp white paper sealed in a brown envelope. Principal Drake stood nearby, formal and unreadable, while two chairs in the corner sat empty for now. The room had been carefully chosen. Neutral ground. Away from the classroom, away from Ms. Aldridge. The test, however, would be anything but neutral. Miles, Principal Drake began, this evaluation will cover math topics from your current level all the way through advanced placement calculus. It's intended to assess your skills fairly. He paused. You'll have 2 hours. Take your time. Do your best. Miles nodded. Though his hands trembled slightly, his eyes stayed focused on the envelope. He was ready. Drake broke the seal and placed the packet of questions in front of him, along with a few sharpened pencils and a clean calculator. You may begin. Outside the room, Miss Aldridge stood stiffly by the window, arms crossed, her lips tight. Beside her, Miss Carter waited calmly, flipping through a science journal without looking up. "This is a complete waste of time," Aldridge muttered. "He'll never make it past page 2. Ms. Carter didn't glance up. "Then why are you so nervous?" Aldridge turned, bristling. "I'm not nervous. I'm frustrated. We're bending over backwards for a student who has been disruptive, defiant, and suddenly, somehow, a mathematical prodigy?" Ms. Carter finally looked at her. "You've been teaching for over 2 decades, haven't you? Your job is to recognize potential, not destroy it." Before Aldridge could respond, the door to the conference room opened. Principal Drake stepped out, looking neutral as always. "He's asking for more paper," he said simply. Aldridge blinked. "What?" "He's finished the entire test," Drake said, "and is now showing alternate solutions." Ms. Carter's eyebrows lifted slightly, but Aldridge's face turned pale. "That's not possible. It's been barely 38 minutes, Drake confirmed. Nevertheless, he returned to the room to retrieve extra paper. Aldridge stood frozen, her words caught in her throat. Inside, Miles continued writing, his hand steady, his mind razor-sharp. Each problem opened like a puzzle box. Every answer wasn't just a solution, it was a story told in symbols. He showed multiple approaches for the harder questions, not to show off, but to be understood. He wanted them to see not just the result, but the thinking behind it, the logic, the structure, the elegance. By the end of the first hour, Miles laid his pencil down. His chest rose and fell with a slow, calm rhythm. For the first time in his life, he felt completely seen. There was no audience, no teacher glaring at him. Just him and the math. When Principal Drake returned, he looked over the papers, flipping through each page. Then he gave a slow nod. "We'll reconvene at lunchtime to review the results. Thank you, Miles." Miles gathered his things and stepped into the hallway. The moment the door closed behind him, he heard whispers. Other students had heard about the test. Some stared, some pointed. A few smiled, but this time, the attention didn't feel mocking. It felt like curiosity. Maybe even respect. During his next few classes, teachers gave him knowing glances, but didn't press. Word was traveling fast. By the time the lunch bell rang, Miles was called back to Principal Drake's office. Miss Carter was already inside, seated with a soft smile on her face. Miss Aldridge sat like a statue, her hands folded over a printed copy of the test, her face unreadable. Principal Drake gestured toward a cushioned chair across from them. "I had this brought in," he said quietly, nodding at the seat. "Figured it might help with your back." Miles gave him a quiet "thank you" and sat carefully. Drake placed a copy of the test on the table. "I've reviewed your work," he began. "So has Miss Carter." Miss Aldridge reviewed it independently as well. He folded his hands. "You not only answered every question correctly, but you offered more than one method for several complex problems. That's unusual, even among our highest achieving students." Miles said nothing. He didn't need to. "The calculus problems, Ms. Carter added gently, weren't just solved, they were explored. Your work showed deep understanding and creativity. Frankly, I haven't seen that kind of thinking in years." Principal Drake looked to Aldridge. Ms. Aldridge? She cleared her throat. The work is accurate, she said flatly, though I remain unconvinced that a student of his prior performance level could have done this unaided. Ms. Carter's brow furrowed. You created the questions, you reviewed the room setup, you demanded he be searched. And he still completed everything perfectly. I suspect he was coached, Aldridge snapped. Perhaps someone has been feeding him the answers. Maybe this mysterious Dr. Roberts people keep mentioning. Just then, a soft knock interrupted them. Principal Drake opened the door, and in stepped a man with silver-streaked hair, glasses, and a kind, steady presence. Sorry to interrupt, he said. I'm Dr. James Roberts. I believe this meeting concerns one of my mentees. Drake blinked. Please come in. Roberts took a seat beside Miles and gave him a reassuring nod. For the past 6 months, he said, I've been mentoring this young man twice a week. I saw something rare in him, a pattern-seeking mind, with the kind of curiosity that can't be taught. He gestured to the test. I've reviewed his work. I can confirm, without hesitation, that this is entirely his own. The problem-solving methods, they match what I've seen in our sessions. Principal Drake looked between them. Would you say his math level is exceptional? Roberts smiled. I'd say he's operating at the level of a second-year undergraduate math student, at 13. Silence fell over the room. Even Aldridge didn't speak. Thank you, Dr. Roberts, Drake finally said. That changes a lot. He turned to Miles. I owe you an apology for not believing in your abilities sooner, for allowing someone's bias to cloud judgment. He looked to Aldridge. And this school has a responsibility to make things right. For the first time since the test began, Miles allowed himself to breathe. Really breathe. Not the tight, shallow air of a boy bracing for pain, but the deep breath of someone who'd finally been heard. The afternoon sun cast golden rays through the tall windows of Westbridge Middle School's administration building. But inside the conference room, the mood was tense, almost electric. Miles sat beside his parents, both dressed in work uniforms, his mother still in her scrubs, his father in a shirt dusted with drywall from the construction site. Neither had spoken much since they arrived. Their hands rested on the polished wood of the meeting table, but their eyes, especially his father's, were sharp, alert, and brimming with quiet fury. Across from them sat Principal Drake, papers neatly arranged in front of him, expression solemn. I want to begin, he said gently, by offering my sincere apologies for what happened to your son. Mrs. Bennet's lips trembled, but she nodded. Mr. Bennet didn't move. I'm aware this isn't the first time Miles was sent to my office, Drake continued. But after speaking with teachers, reviewing his test, and now hearing from Dr. Roberts, I realize this isn't a case of misbehavior. It's a case of talent that we failed to recognize. And worse, he paused, we punished him for it. A silence followed. Then Miles's father leaned forward. We trusted this school, he said, his voice low but steady. We saved up to move here. We worked overtime, took weekend shifts, just to give him a better education. His eyes never left the principal's. And instead, he came home with bruises, afraid to speak, ashamed for being smart. Miles looked down, hands clenched in his lap. His mother gently reached over and squeezed his wrist. We didn't know, she whispered. We didn't know it was that bad. Principal Drake nodded solemnly. I understand your anger. You have every right to it. He opened a manila folder and slid it across the table. This is a draft plan. It includes immediate steps to support Miles' placement in advanced math classes at the high school, continued mentorship with Dr. Roberts, and accommodations for his other classes to match his learning pace. Mrs. Bennet opened the folder, scanning quickly. I've also contacted the district board, Drake added. There will be a full investigation into Ms. Aldridge's conduct. He looked to Miles, and in the meantime, she has been placed on administrative leave. Mr. Bennet's jaw flexed. That's a start. That evening, in a modest apartment on the south side of town, Miss Aldridge sat motionless on her couch. A printed letter lay open on the coffee table, formal notice of investigation, typed in bold black ink. After 27 years of teaching, her apartment was silent. Not even the television was on. She had replayed the events of the last 2 days in her head countless times. The defiance in Miles's voice, the welts on his back, the flawless math test. And finally, Dr. Roberts's calm, unwavering testimony. In her hands, she held a photo of her first class, taken years ago, a younger version of herself standing tall in the center, surrounded by smiling students. What had she become? She'd once believed in helping children reach their potential, but somewhere along the way, she'd begun guarding the gate instead of opening it. A knock at the door startled her. She didn't move at first. Another knock, gentle, polite. When she finally opened it, she found Dr. Roberts standing in the hallway, his expression neutral. "If you've come to gloat," she began. "I haven't," he said calmly. "I've come to understand." For a long moment, she said nothing. Then she stepped aside. Inside, they sat facing each other in silence. After a while, she spoke. "He made a mockery of everything I worked for," she said bitterly. "All those years I spent studying, sacrificing, he just walks in and sees it." Dr. Roberts folded his hands. "Mathematics doesn't reward time, it rewards insight. Effort matters, yes. But sometimes brilliance chooses its own vessel." She scoffed. "He's a child." "He's also a student," Dr. Roberts replied softly. "And students don't need us to compete with them. They need us to guide them." Her shoulders sagged. "I lost sight of that." Dr. Roberts stood. "You still have time to remember." The next evening, the district held an emergency school board meeting. By 6:30 p.m., the auditorium was packed. Parents, teachers, students, even local media crowded in. Some stood in the aisles, others lined the walls. Miles sat quietly in the front row with his parents. On one side of him sat Ms. Carter. On the other, Dr. Roberts. Behind him, students, who had once ignored him, now leaned forward in support. Board President Clarissa Graham, a woman with steel-gray hair and a reputation for fairness, called the meeting to order. "We are here tonight," she said, "because our system failed. And when a school fails a child, it fails all of us." Principal Drake was the first to speak. He laid out the timeline, the classroom incident, the test, the physical abuse, and the mentorship Miles had quietly pursued on his own. Then, public comments began. A father stepped forward. "I've never spoken at one of these before," he said. "But what happened to that boy, what happened to Miles, wasn't just a mistake. It was a warning. We need to do better." A mother followed, holding her daughter's hand. "She's gifted too, but she hides it. She told me she didn't want to get in trouble like the boy in the story." Then came a voice that silenced the room. "Miles is in my class," said Zach, standing nervously at the podium. "I used to laugh when Mrs. Aldrich picked on him. I thought it was normal, but it wasn't." He looked down. "I just want to say I'm sorry." Gasps followed, then silence. Finally, Clarissa Graham rose again. "The board has reviewed all evidence, and we are taking the following actions." She listed them clearly. Termination of Ms. Aldridge's employment. Recommendation to revoke her teaching license. District-wide policy updates. New gifted student programs. A new reporting system for abuse. And lastly, she said, turning toward Miles and his family, "We owe your family a deep and public apology." The room erupted in applause. Not polite, not rehearsed, but real, raw. Earned. As the noise swelled around him, Miles turned to his parents. For once, his father smiled. His mother reached for his hand, and for the first time in his life, Miles Bennett felt seen. 3 months had passed since that fateful board meeting, but the ripples it created still moved through every hallway of Westbridge Middle School. Gone were the whispers that once followed Miles Bennett for the wrong reasons. Now, when his name came up in conversation, it was often accompanied by admiration or curiosity. Some called him a prodigy. Others simply called him the kid who changed everything. And maybe he had. New posters lined the walls, vibrant images with bold messages. Every student deserves to be seen. Silence is not strength. Speak up. Genius comes in many forms. They were more than decoration. They were reminders. One Thursday afternoon, Miles sat cross-legged on the floor of the school library. Around him, a small cluster of 6th and 7th graders leaned in, eyes wide, notebooks open. "So when you see a word problem," Miles said, sketching a triangle on a blank sheet of paper, "don't just look at the numbers. Ask yourself, what's really happening here?" A 6th-grade girl named Amara furrowed her brow. "You mean like there's a story inside the problem?" "Exactly," Miles grinned. "Math is like a secret language. You just have to learn how to translate it." Miss Carter watched from the corner of the room. She didn't interrupt, just smiled, quietly proud. A few months ago, this boy had been invisible. Now, he was a mentor. After the students left, she approached. "You know," she said, adjusting the stack of books in her arms, "you're a better teacher than half the staff here." Miles chuckled, a little embarrassed. "I just remember what it felt like," he said softly. "To be confused, to ask for help, and get silence instead." "That's what makes you different," Miss Carter said. "You're not just smart, Miles. You're compassionate." He shrugged, but his smile lingered. Outside, the sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows over the freshly painted sign near the entrance. It read, "Westbridge Middle School, a place where every voice counts." That night at home, Miles sat on the couch with his parents, reviewing a packet from the State University's summer mathematics program. "Full scholarship," his father murmured, eyes skimming the letter again and again. "Room and board included. Unbelievable." Miles looked nervous. "I've never been away from home that long," he admitted. "What if I don't belong there?" His mother set down her tea. "Sweetheart," she said, touching his cheek, "you've already proven you belong in places people didn't expect. You'll be just fine." Still, the thought of leaving made Miles anxious, but excitement tugged at him too, like a balloon string in his chest. He looked down at the registration form. One signature left. The next morning, he handed the packet to Dr. Roberts, who was waiting for him in the high school's advanced math classroom. Dr. Roberts flipped through the pages, nodded approvingly. "So, you're doing it?" Miles nodded. "I am." "Good," the professor smiled. "This isn't just a program, Miles. It's a doorway. And you're ready to walk through it." That afternoon, back at Westbridge, something unusual happened. The classroom that once belonged to Ms. Aldridge was now run by Mr. Diaz, a young teacher with a quick smile and a love for active learning. His class buzzed with energy. Students debated, collaborated, laughed even when working on equations. As Miles passed by the open door, a few students waved. "Hey, Bennett," one called. "Think you could check my work later?" Miles gave a thumbs up. It was surreal still. This school, which had once ignored him, worse now, looked to him. Even the faculty had changed. The old culture of quiet compliance had begun to break. Teachers shared ideas, talked openly about how to support students better. There was still work to do. But change had taken root. That Thursday evening, Miles stood once again in the same district conference room where his story had first been brought into the light. But this time, he wasn't a topic on the agenda. He was the speaker. The science club had been invited to present a collaborative project modeling population growth using differential equations. Miles had helped lead it. As he clicked through his final slide, the audience, parents, board members, teachers applauded. Afterward, several students came up to shake his hand. "You explained that so clearly. Can you show me how to do that kind of math? You're like our own Einstein." Miles laughed. "No, I'm just a kid who loves math." As he left the building with his parents and Miss Carter, a voice called out. It was Zach. "Hey, Miles," he said, jogging up. "My brother goes to State U. He heard you're going this summer and said you'll love it." Miles smiled. "Thanks." Zach scratched the back of his neck. "Also, I never said it, but I'm really sorry for how I acted before." "You already did," Miles said gently, "but thanks again." They stood awkwardly for a beat. Then Zach blurted, "Want to come to the arcade this weekend? A bunch of us are going." Miles looked at his parents. His mom nodded. "Sure," Miles said. "Sounds fun." Later that night, as he lay in bed, Miles stared up at the glow-in-the-dark stars on his ceiling. He thought about that moment in Mrs. Aldridge's classroom, the fear, the humiliation, the sting of being struck. He also thought about solving that problem, the marker in his hand, the symbols flowing out of him like music. He realized now that moment hadn't just been about math. It had been about voice, about refusing to sit down, about standing, even when your legs shake, about letting your truth be seen. Outside his window, the street was quiet, but in his heart, something moved, a quiet certainty. He wasn't just solving equations anymore. He was living one, and its answer was hope. In every child lies a hidden light, but too often it's dimmed by those meant to guide them. Miles Bennett's story reminds us that brilliance doesn't always come dressed in straight A's or polished appearances. Sometimes it's quiet, worn down, and doubted by the very systems meant to nurture it. His journey is a powerful call to action, not just for educators, but for all of us. It urges us to listen more deeply, to question authority when it silences the vulnerable, and to stand up for the overlooked. For older generations who've seen decades of change, this story reignites the timeless truth that character, courage, and compassion are what truly elevate a society. Whether you're a grandparent, retired teacher, or neighbor, your voice still holds power. Use it to uplift, to notice the quiet child in the back of the room, and to make sure no brilliance ever goes unseen again. Because when we believe in the unheard, we not only restore justice, we ignite a legacy of hope